Welcome to Sleepy University. Tonight, we drift back thousands of years to walk quietly through the shaded courtyards and temple corridors of two of humanity's oldest civilizations, Mesopotamia and Ancient Greece. As the world outside grows quieter, let your thoughts slow down too. You're safe here, just you, this gentle voice, and some long-forgotten clay tablets and scrolls. Let us begin. In both ancient Mesopotamia and Greece, intimacy was not just a private matter. It was woven into the very fabric of law, ritual, and everyday life. The body, naked, clothed, adorned, spoke its own language, and the rules that shaped love, desire, and marriage were sometimes strict, sometimes strange, but always revealing. In Mesopotamia, which includes the lands of the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians, society was structured around the household. And marriage, more than an emotional union, was an economic and social contract. Families arranged these bonds carefully. Love could come later, or not at all. There were laws, written in cuneiform on clay, that outlined what a husband could expect of his wife, and what she could demand in return. A wife, for example, could own property, and in some cases, even initiate divorce. But still, the man of the house held the greater power. He was the head, and the expectations placed on him were many, especially those concerning children and inheritance. In ancient Greece, centuries later, things were a little different, and also quite the same. The Greek world, especially in places like Athens, valued the oikos, the household, as a basic unit of the state. Marriage was essential, but again, not always romantic. Athenian men typically married in their 30s to teenage girls. The age gap was not seen as strange. Rather, it was believed to create harmony, wisdom on one side, obedience on the other. But intimacy, that was handled elsewhere. Greek society made room for multiple layers of affection. A man could have a wife to run his home and raise his children, and yet he might seek pleasure, conversation, or even emotional intimacy outside that marriage, with hetairae, educated courtesans, or in relationships with younger men. These customs were not only accepted, they were discussed by philosophers and playwrights alike. And then there were the bodies themselves, sculpted, painted, celebrated. Greek statues with idealized forms, the perfect balance of strength and serenity, stood not just as art, but as symbols of deeper values. Physical beauty in the Greek mind often mirrored inner virtue, and yet, beneath this calm marble exterior, lay a world filled with rules, roles, and contradictions. In Mesopotamia, the human body also had meaning, especially in religious contexts. Priests, priestesses, and temple workers played roles that blurred the line between sacred and sensual. The gods were not shy. In the myths, they desired, seduced, and even punished through acts of intimacy. To be human was to be shaped by divine desire. And so, in both cultures, physical union had layers. It was about duty, about power, about beauty, sometimes about love, and always about the body's place in the world. As you sink deeper into your pillow, think of this. Millennia ago, under starlit skies and oil lamps, people whispered secrets, very much like ours. Their hearts beat to the same rhythm. Their dreams of closeness, of safety, of connection, felt strangely familiar. The clay tablets may be cracked, the scrolls may have faded, but the story of intimacy is as old as sleep itself. Still nestled under the blankets? Good. You don't need to move. Let the dim lamp of curiosity glow softly beside you as we return to a time when the human body was not hidden, but unveiled, sacred, symbolic, even divine. Tonight, we wander through dusty temples and marble colonnades, where art, religion, and eroticism danced hand in hand. Let's begin in Mesopotamia. In this land of rivers and ziggurats, the divine was rarely far from the physical. The gods had bodies, powerful ones, desiring ones, and their desires often mirrored human longing. The goddess Ishtar, for example, was not just the deity of love, but of war, fertility, and erotic power. She could arouse and destroy. Her image, often naked, adorned with jewelry, was both feared and revered. In temple rituals, the body became a tool for worship. Some scholars believe that sacred prostitution, now more often called cultic sexual rites, was practiced in honor of Ishtar and similar deities. Whether literal or symbolic, these rituals were about connection, human to divine, flesh to spirit. The temple in these moments was not just a holy place, it was a place where intimacy reached toward the heavens. The body, naked or draped in fine cloth, told a story. Now cross the sea and centuries, and we arrive in Greece. Here the human form wasn't just sacred, it was ideal. Walk into any ancient Greek sculpture gallery today, and you'll see it. Smooth marble torsos, chiseled jaws, muscles frozen in eternal grace. But these weren't just decorations, they reflected a worldview. To the Greeks, beauty was moral. A well-shaped body reflected a well-shaped soul. The word kalokagathia combined physical beauty, kalos, with moral goodness, agathos. A harmonious form was a sign of inner virtue. The naked male athlete in particular became a symbol of balance, discipline, and glory. The female nude, though rarer, held a different power. Goddesses like Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, were often shown nude or partially draped. But this was not vulgarity. It was softness, allure, a reminder of the fine line between mortal and divine. In Greek art, nudity wasn't shameful. It was truthful. Heroes, gods, lovers, all could be shown without clothing, their bodies speaking louder than words. Each pose, each curve whispered something: strength, sorrow, seduction, transcendence. In both Greece and Mesopotamia, eroticism was not hidden in the shadows. It pulsed through myth, poetry, and prayer. Take, for instance, the hymn to Inanna, a Mesopotamian text more than 4,000 years old. It describes divine love with language so lush, it blushes even today. Plow my vulva, man of my heart, plow my vulva. And yes, that's an actual line. Erotic, yes, but also cosmic. Fertility wasn't just a physical act, it was a divine necessity. Love created life. Life pleased the gods. The Greeks, too, gave voice to desire. The lyric poetry of Sappho, soft and fragmented, speaks of longing with a tender intimacy. Her words, written on delicate scraps of papyrus, still hum with feeling. Quiet, lingering. So why did these civilizations embrace erotic imagery in the sacred and artistic? Because the body was never just flesh. It was a sign, a message, a mystery. It reminded people of power and vulnerability, joy and danger, creation and death. To depict it, nude, aroused, adorned, was to honor life in its most intense form. And now, as your breath slows and your eyes begin to grow heavy, think of a marble statue resting in the quiet of a museum, timeless, still, waiting, much like you, between dreams. In the next part, we'll explore the surprising intersection of prostitution, ritual, and society in the ancient world. But there's no rush. Let the images soften, let the thoughts dissolve, and let the quiet return. In the ancient world, sexuality was not confined to bedrooms or whispers. It walked openly through markets, temples, and law courts, sometimes clothed in silk, sometimes robed in incense and prayer. In Mesopotamia, one of the oldest and most debated traditions was that of so-called sacred prostitution. The historian Herodotus, writing centuries later, described a ritual in Babylon. Every woman, once in her life, was required to sit outside the temple of Ishtar and wait until a stranger threw a coin into her lap and lay with her. Only then, he wrote, could she return home, her duty to the goddess fulfilled. Modern scholars debate whether this practice truly existed in the form Herodotus claimed. Some suggest it was misunderstood, a poetic exaggeration, or a mistranslation of symbolic rites. But whether literal or not, the idea itself tells us much, that sexuality, in the Mesopotamian imagination, could be offered as devotion. Temple complexes in cities like Uruk and Sippar were not only religious centers, they were economic hubs. Some priestesses, known as Naditu, lived in cloisters, managing land and overseeing rituals. They may have taken vows of chastity, or, depending on the goddess they served, participated in fertility rites. The lines between priestess, courtesan, and symbol of divine femininity were not always clear. To give one's body in ritual was not shameful. It was service. It was power. And power, of a different sort, existed in the secular brothels of Mesopotamian cities too. These were places of transaction, but also of survival. Women, and sometimes men, worked in these establishments, many of them enslaved or indebted. Their names appear in contracts, inventories, even legal disputes. The Code of Hammurabi, written around 1750 BCE, includes specific laws regarding prostitutes. Their rights, though limited, were protected in some contexts. A son born to a prostitute, for instance, could inherit property under certain conditions. A reminder that even on the margins, there were rules and humanity. In ancient Greece, prostitution was not just accepted, it was regulated. There were 3 social levels of sex workers. At the base were street prostitutes, often enslaved, exposed, and vulnerable. Above them worked brothel workers, owned and taxed by the state. And at the top were the hetairae. The hetaira was more than a courtesan. She was often educated, skilled in music, conversation, and wit. She might attend symposia, drinking parties where wives were forbidden. There, reclining on cushions beside philosophers and poets, she could influence, entertain, and even challenge men intellectually. Famous hetairai like Aspasia of Miletus, companion to Pericles, held positions of real social presence. They were not wives, but they had power of a different kind, the power to shape conversation, taste, and sometimes even politics. But for most sex workers, life was less elevated. In both Athens and Corinth, state-run brothels existed. In fact, the Athenian statesman Solon is sometimes credited with creating the first public brothels, using their profits to fund city projects. Prostitutes, in turn, paid a special tax. Their profession, though marginalized, was visible, known, named. And yet, the contrast remained. Respectable women were kept indoors, veiled, their sexuality guarded. Prostitutes, by choice or force, inhabited the open space. They were both needed and judged, celebrated in art, but shamed in life. Eroticism and economy danced closely together. Desire had a price, but it also had meaning, religious, political, even philosophical. Some philosophers, like the Stoics, warned against indulgence. Others, like the Cynics, mocked convention altogether. And then there were the poets, who simply wrote of longing, of lovers in the night, and of moments that passed like dreams. As we drift further into the quiet of ancient nights, we begin to see the ancient world was not prudish, nor was it truly free. Sex was sacred. It was labor. It was a performance. It was survival. And somewhere in between, it was human. Ahead of us lies another layer, how same-sex relationships, especially between men in Greece, formed their system of education, mentorship, and emotional connection. And just as intimacy could take on sacred meaning in temple rituals and transactional form in the streets, so too did it flow, quietly and complexly, through bonds between people of the same sex. In Mesopotamia, surviving records say little on the matter, but absence does not always mean denial. There are scattered clues in myths, omens, and legal texts that hint at a world more nuanced than we might expect. Take the Epic of Gilgamesh, a tale of kingship, grief, and heroic feats, but also of deep affection between two men. Gilgamesh and Enkidu, their bond forged in wildness and tempered in battle, are described with striking emotional intensity. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh mourns not with distant dignity, but with raw despair. He holds the body. He weeps. He wanders the earth to escape the pain. Is it friendship? Love? Something beyond labels? The text never says. But the tenderness lingers. Mesopotamian law codes, for the most part, do not criminalize same-sex relations. Some sources suggest the practice may have been acknowledged without moral panic. Certain omen texts refer to male-male intercourse as a matter of fate or fortune, not crime. But Greece is where the record becomes clearer and the culture more open, though not without its own rules. In many Greek city-states, particularly Athens, same-sex relationships between men were woven into the very fabric of education, mentorship, and social hierarchy. The model was called pederasty, a structured relationship between an older man, Erastes, and a younger boy, Eromenos, usually in his teens. This bond was expected to be pedagogical. The older partner would guide the younger, academically, morally, even physically. But it could also include physical intimacy. It was not considered shameful. In fact, many philosophers saw it as noble, when guided by moderation and respect. Plato, in his Symposium, described love between men as the highest form of love, one that led the soul upward toward truth and beauty. Socrates, surrounded by admiring students, often spoke of desire as something to be mastered, not erased. But it's important to note, this system was not equal. The younger partner was meant to be passive, quiet, and ultimately grow out of the role. To remain in the beloved position into adulthood could be seen as improper. Outside this structured model, male-male relationships did exist, between peers, between soldiers, between poets and companions. The sacred band of Thebes, for example, was an elite military unit said to be made entirely of paired lovers, bound by affection as much as by armor. They fought fiercely and died together. Female same-sex relationships are harder to trace. Women's voices were rarely preserved in Greek records, but one voice echoes still: Sappho of Lesbos. Her poetry, fragmentary and soft, speaks of longing glances, braids undone, and skin brushed by fingertips. Her subjects were often women. Her tone, never crude, always aching. From her island, the word lesbian was born. But even here, we find more poetry than prescription. The Greeks, while accepting of male-male intimacy, left female-female relationships mostly undefined. Perhaps they did not see them as threatening, or perhaps they simply weren't looking. In all of this, whispers from tablets, fragments of song, statues frozen in closeness, what emerges is not one clear rulebook, but a patchwork of customs, beliefs, and possibilities. Same-sex desire was not always hidden, but it was rarely free from structure. It could be noble, philosophical, sacred, or invisible, forgotten, unnamed. And as we let these echoes fade into the background, we approach the final shapes of the ancient body, how gender and physical difference were understood, assigned, and sometimes defied. Not all bodies in the ancient world fit neatly into the categories we might expect, and not all people lived in ways that matched the roles assigned to them. Gender, like so much else in Mesopotamia and Greece, was not simply biological. It was woven through law, labor, divinity, and form. And while the body was often used to define one's place, it could also resist that definition in subtle, forgotten ways. In Mesopotamia, male and female roles were clearly laid out, but never entirely rigid. Some cuneiform tablets mention individuals described as Asinu, Kurgaru, or Gala, figures who served in temples, particularly those of Ishtar. These individuals may have been male, female, or something in between. Some texts suggest they dressed in women's clothing, performed in rituals of mourning or ecstasy, and spoke in voices outside of everyday life. Were they eunuchs, third gender figures, priests, dancers? We may never know fully, but what is clear is that Mesopotamian culture made space, however ceremonial, for people who did not conform to typical gender expectations. The gods themselves were fluid. Ishtar could be fierce or nurturing, male or female in different contexts. She embodied a range, not a limit. And so did some of her followers. Body, role, and spirit, these could blur. In ancient Greece, gender was more codified, but physical ideals still told a more complicated story. Men were expected to be strong, controlled, rational. Women, modest, domestic, and fertile. But these ideals were more aspirational than universal. Most people, after all, simply lived their lives. Still, art and medicine show us what the Greeks valued and feared. Sculptures of the ideal male body emphasized balance, muscularity, symmetry. Statues like the Doryphoros or the athletes of Delphi captured an imagined perfection, the body frozen at its most composed, most Greek. Not real men, but ideals, clean, firm, emotionally unreadable. The female body, in contrast, was depicted less often in the nude. When it was, the tone was softer, gentle curves, a turned gaze, one hand reaching to cover the body as if it had been surprised. Even goddesses, Aphrodite, Hera, Artemis, were often shown in moments of transition, not stillness. In the medical writings of Hippocrates and Galen, the female body was described as porous, moist, and cooler than the male body. It was seen as less stable, less complete. Wombs wandered, humors spilled. The male body was the norm, the female, a variation. But in these very descriptions, we glimpse anxiety. The body was never truly controllable, not by myth, nor art, nor medicine. Some individuals did not marry, others chose not to reproduce. Some took on roles outside their assigned gender expectations. Women who led religious rituals, men who remained unmarried, performers who blurred gender on stage. There were many kinds of bodies, and many ways to live in them. Even in death, difference remained. Graves in Mesopotamia and Greece often reflected gendered expectations, weapons with men, jewelry with women. But sometimes, the items are surprising. An elegant comb in a warrior's grave, a miniature sword beside a woman's bones. The line between masculine and feminine was present, but never perfectly straight. And so, just as the Greeks believed the soul could outlive the body, they also knew that the body could never fully define the person. It was a shape, a frame, a suggestion, and like all things ancient, it could shift in meaning depending on who was watching. Throughout the ancient world, rules shaped the body, but stories gave it meaning. In Mesopotamia, law codes like those of Ur-Nammu and Hammurabi defined behavior with remarkable precision. What a wife owed her husband, what punishments followed adultery, how inheritance passed from father to son, or, in rare cases, to daughter. These were not just moral guidelines, they were tools of control, designed to keep society orderly. The body was property, a vessel for legitimacy. Even fertility was regulated. A barren wife could be replaced. A concubine might bear heirs. Surrogacy, in the form of handmaids, was legally described. And yet, these same societies told myths where rules blurred. Take Inanna's descent into the underworld. She strips off her clothing piece by piece, passing through 7 gates, naked, judged, and then reborn. Her journey is not one of shame, but of power reclaimed. A ritual death, a bodily reset. The gods allowed contradiction. Rituals, too, walked this line. In Babylon, marriage contracts were sealed with offerings and oaths. In Greece, wedding ceremonies moved from the bride's home to the groom's under torchlight. Public, symbolic, irreversible. But rituals could also subvert the everyday. In Greek theater, for instance, men played all roles, even women. Draped in masks and robes, they mimicked femininity, mocked it, celebrated it. Was it parody, or permission to explore something unspoken? The Eleusinian mysteries, open to both men and women, promised transformation through secrecy. Initiates entered as one thing and emerged, changed. No one knows what was said. That silence may have been the point. And in mythology, the body was endlessly flexible. Zeus took the form of a swan. Aphrodite was born from sea foam. Hermaphroditus fused with another being and became both male and female forever. The gods refused limits. So did the people sometimes. Even legal systems, for all their structure, left cracks. Certain roles, such as priestess or courtesan, existed outside the household. Some people lived unmarried, unchilded, and undisturbed. And so, after all these scrolls and stones, we return to a simple truth. The ancient world was not a monolith. It was a landscape of rules and of ruptures, of bodies watched closely, and bodies allowed to disappear into myth. Gender, desire, love, and the body itself were always shifting, sometimes bound, sometimes released. And just like the stories carved into tablets or painted on vases, they were never meant to be read only once. They were meant to be remembered, whispered, dreamed. And while myth, law, and ritual shaped public understanding of the body, what of the private world? The rooms where voices grew softer, where oil lamps flickered, where closeness took place not in symbol, but in quiet routine. Let us step gently into the bedroom. In Mesopotamia, the home was not only a shelter, but a structure of hierarchy. The father ruled, the mother managed. Children, servants, and guests each had their space, some clearly defined, others only by curtain or wall. Intimacy in this world was not always hidden, but it was often practical. Marriage contracts included clauses about when and how intimacy might occur. The goal usually was children. Love could exist, but duty came first. And yet, even in this structured setting, the bedroom was a place of softness, of rest, of whispered things. We do not have detailed floor plans, but clay tablets mention beds, coverings, perfumes, oils. There was warmth in these details. Someone prepared the bed. Someone lit the lamp. Someone waited. In Greece, the layout of homes often split space along gendered lines. The gynekon, the women's quarters, was separate from the main social area. Visitors did not wander there. Conversations were quiet, children grew, wives worked, and behind a closed wooden door, a marriage was lived. Intimacy in Greek households was framed by custom. A man might visit his wife's room at night and leave again before morning. It was not romantic in the modern sense, but it could still be tender. The body, after all, belongs not only to law, but to habit, familiarity, breath shared in the dark. Bathing, too, was a ritual of the body, half hygiene, half reverence. In Mesopotamia, water had sacred meaning. Priests bathed before entering temples. Statues were washed and oiled as acts of devotion. And within homes, bowls of warm water, cloths, and scented unguents played their part. In Greece, public baths were common in later periods, but even before that, the private bath held meaning. Oil was rubbed on skin and scraped off with curved tools called strigils. Muscles were massaged. Sand was brushed away. It was not only cleansing, it was preparation, a slow unveiling of the self. Sometimes, lovers bathed one another. Sometimes, a slave bathed a master. Sometimes, someone bathed alone and thought of someone else. And there were objects, small ones, left behind in the dust of time. Combs, jars of perfume, bronze mirrors, clay figurines of couples embracing, amulets tied with string. Things that tell us there was affection, there was routine, there was care. Not every moment was ritual, not every touch was sacred. But in bedrooms and baths, the ancient body was simply lived in, and that too was a kind of holiness. As we leave this quiet domestic world behind, we might ask, what happened when these routines were disrupted? When a scandal broke the surface? When someone strayed? When trust dissolved? In the next part, we'll move gently into the shadows of adultery, exposure, and consequence. Even in a world guided by law, custom, and quiet ritual, bodies did not always behave. desire wandered, promises frayed, and when they did, the consequences were rarely simple or private. Let us now walk carefully through scandal. In Mesopotamia, adultery was not just a personal betrayal. It was a legal offense, one that disrupted property, lineage, and divine order. The Code of Hammurabi is clear. If a married woman was caught with another man, both could be bound and thrown into the river. The husband could choose to forgive or not. In some cases, the king's court intervened, and always, the gods were watching. But what counted as proof? Witnesses? A rumor? A jealous neighbor? Clay tablets are silent on that, and silence in law leaves room for judgment. Men, too, could be punished, but with more leniency. A husband lying with a prostitute was not unusual, but if he seduced another man's wife, the offense became greater, not for the act itself, but for the disruption of another household's future. Adultery, then, was not about love. It was about structure. In ancient Greece, the rules were just as intricate, but laced with paradox. A married woman caught in adultery brought shame to her entire household. Her husband was expected, required in fact, to divorce her. She might be barred from attending festivals, forbidden from wearing jewelry in public, or even expelled from the home. The man involved? If caught in the act, he could be beaten or fined, and sometimes killed. But only if he was found with a citizen's wife. Affairs with slaves or courtesans were rarely punished. The issue, again, was not morality. It was ownership. There are stories, of course, of wives locked away in their chambers, of husbands plotting revenge, of quiet secrets kept under household roofs for years, known to all, spoken by none. And then there are the myths. Aphrodite and Ares, caught in a golden net by Hephaestus as they lay entwined. The other gods laughed, but behind the laughter, a lesson. Even the gods could be shamed. Greek comedies often mocked adulterers, slippered husbands, nosy slaves. They turned scandal into entertainment, because scandal was familiar. It lived in every polis, behind every door. But not all consequences were theatrical. For some women, a single accusation could mean isolation, exile, or worse. And for some men, honor was so tightly wound into reputation that a whispered name could unravel everything. Still, people risked it. Love letters were hidden under pillows. Lamps were extinguished too early. Bath oils shared that weren't meant to be. And silence. Always silence. Now, as we leave these shadows behind, we return to a more vulnerable place. The body not as scandal, but as cycle. We turn toward childbirth, fertility, and the rituals of creating life itself. After scandal fades, and silence settles again in the household, life begins, or tries to. In the ancient world, fertility was not just a hope. It was a duty, a sign of favor from the gods, a necessity for the household, the city, the line of inheritance. And no body carried more weight, literal and symbolic, than the body of a woman with child. In Mesopotamia, prayers for fertility filled entire tablets. Incantations were spoken over wombs. Offerings were made to goddesses like Ninhursag and Gula, givers of life, healers of the body. Amulets were tied around the wrists of hopeful mothers. Clay figurines, small, rounded, protective, were placed under beds. Sometimes the gods answered. Sometimes they didn't. Infertility was feared. It could end a marriage, or bring in another woman, a concubine, to bear the child instead. The child mattered more than the love. Lineage mattered more than peace. Greek women too bore this weight. The goddess Eileithyia, daughter of Hera, presided over labor. Women in Athens prayed to her in secret, offered cakes and coins, asked not for comfort, but for survival. Because childbirth was dangerous. There were no hospitals, no anesthesia, only midwives, herbs, whispered chants, and the strength of generations. Sometimes, both mother and child died. Sometimes, only one lived. And when both survived, it was called a blessing, loudly, publicly, with wine poured to the gods. Greek medical texts, like those of Hippocrates, spoke of the womb as restless, wandering. They believed it floated through the body, causing madness if left empty. And so, marriage and childbirth were seen not only as duty, but as cure. A woman who bore children was healthy. A woman who didn't was suspicious. Soft punishments followed, less freedom, less voice, less space. And yet, even here, tenderness survived. Tiny baby sandals, swaddling cloths embroidered with prayers, small graves with lullabies etched in stone. A mother's voice, even if lost to time, remains in objects, in lullabies never recorded, in milk spilled, in tears held in the dark. In these ancient worlds, life was fragile, but so was love, and the body, carrying both, was honored, feared, and watched. And now, as the cycle of life turns toward its later chapter, we follow the path of age, of the changing body, of what it means to fade gracefully. The body that once bore children, fought wars, whispered in the dark, grows quiet. In Mesopotamia and Greece, old age was not celebrated in the way youth or beauty were, but it was not ignored. It was marked in stories, in prayers, in creased statues with softened edges. In Mesopotamia, few records describe the elderly in daily life, but some tablets mention them. Grandfathers witnessing contracts, widows managing estates, old women serving in temples. A long life was considered a blessing, though often a hard one. With age came wisdom, but also vulnerability. Sons inherited, younger wives replaced older ones, and yet the old remained, watching, remembering. Some were respected, some simply endured. In Greek thought, aging was both feared and analyzed. Poets like Sappho wrote of fading beauty, of limbs that no longer moved as they once did, of hair gone white, of desire slipping away like a tide. Philosophers, too, pondered aging. Plato, in the Republic, suggested that with age came freedom, from passion, from distraction, from the urgencies of the body. But not everyone agreed. Aeschylus described old men as shadows. Hesiod warned that a wife in her youth was a joy, and a burden in her age. It was not cruelty, it was realism, or at least what they believed was realism, and the body itself told the story. Joints stiffened, vision dimmed, the skin lost its softness, but perhaps most deeply felt was the vanishing of touch. The lover no longer reached, the children grew and left. Hands once busy with oil, thread, tools, sat still. And yet, in the temples, old women still poured wine. In homes, grandmothers still taught lullabies. In symposiums, old men still spoke, even when no one asked them to. The decline of the body was never easy, but it was known. It was accepted. Statues of aging gods reminded mortals that even the divine grew tired, that even Aphrodite might step away from the mirror one day, that Zeus himself might sit in silence. So we end, not with sorrow, but with stillness. The ancient body, loved, adorned, judged, punished, celebrated, has nothing left to prove. It rests, and we with it. The lamp is low, the room is quiet, and if you're still awake, only barely. Thank you for walking this long, slow path through ancient lives. If you ever need to wander again, Sleepy University will be waiting. More lectures, more voices, more sleep.